are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined this week for UFC 272 going down in Las Vegas, Nevada. At the T-Mobile Arena, we'll have Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal in the main event this weekend, and I am joined by two guests. We, of course, have John Kelly, as always, with us, and we also have a special guest for the big pay-per-view this card. We got John the Martian at UFO UFC on Twitter. Joining us today, we got a three-man booth. We got 13 fights going down this weekend, a grudge match in the main event, and a pretty solid card on paper, at least, going down on Saturday night. John Kelly, we'll kick it to you first, and then we'll go over to John, the other John, who we'll call Martian throughout the show. John Kelly, how are you doing, my friend, headed into this pretty exciting pay-per-view weekend?
Yeah, doing good, man. Was on the Club and Sub podcast last night, so definitely go check that out if you guys haven't seen that show already. Got a good group of guys over there. We went over some bets. It was a good time. You should definitely check it out if you haven't. But yeah, I'm excited. This is a fun card. I think a lot of people are excited. There's an extra buzz with the pay-per-view, but also the Draftkings slate, I think, is like one of the best in a while, because obviously we have, the late ad with Moicano, two guys priced under 7,500. That's going to be a big decision point. Kind of going to decide the slate. And then, of course, you have the main event, which is a 5-rounder as well. So there's just a lot of underdogs on the card. Like, there's a lot of salary you can leave on the table. Just a lot of decision points, which I always like. So definitely excited to talk through it with both of you guys.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for the Draftkings card as well. And then we also bring in John Martian, who hosts the Ozzy and Martian podcast, of course. John, first time on the show. Welcome to the show. How are you doing? I assume the energy levels are high, despite us a little bit of a late start. I assume the energy levels are high headed into Covington versus Masvidal.
Yeah, I mean, the press conference got me stoked for this fight. Immaculate stuff on the mic from those gentlemen, and it's good to be here. I've been friends with you guys for seems like at least a year now, and I love discussing fights with you. And I'm very happy to be on the podcast, and I'm excited to talk about this pay-per-view card. Good prelims and solid fights on the main card too. Two 5-rounders, even though there's no titles on the line. Still some really good fights going down on Saturday.
Agreed. I think the prelims are kind of a strong suit of this card. Not the best main event in the world with no UFC gold on the line, of course, but I do think there'll be a lot of entertaining fights come Saturday night. We do have 13 to talk about. Don't want to spend too much time, especially with the 13-man boot. So let's get right down to business. First fight of the evening in the light heavyweight division. We got Dustin Jacoby, currently lined as a minus 200 favorite. He's $8,600 on DK. He takes on Lord Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, who comes back plus 170. He is $7.6K flat on DraftKings. We got Dustin Jacoby coming off of a short notice win where he looked pretty flawless, I would say, against John Alon, and he beat Darren Stewart before that. Hasn't faced a ton of really strong competition inside the UFC, but he's undefeated outside of a draw. Is the only non-win on his record against Jan Kutilaba. And then with Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, someone who had a lot of hype coming behind his name in the UFC, dropped 2 consecutive fights to OSP and Jimmy Crute. Kind of was exposed a little bit in the grappling realm, but has bounced back, 2 consecutive wins. We all know the deal with Oleksiejczuk, a little bit small for this weight class. Jacoby, a guy with a pretty extensive kickboxing background, should figure to have a pretty big reach advantage in this matchup. John Kelly, I'll kick it to you first here. Any takes on the betting market for this fight, or any interest in the DFS market as well?
Not really, to be honest with you. Like I talked about it last night. This is kind of one of the fights where I don't really have a super strong take, but I'm also like not all that excited to watch this fight. Like, I think there's a lot of fights up and down the card that I'm sure we'll get into that I have a lot of bets on. This is like one of my most bets cards in like the past 12 months or something like that. It might even be ever come Saturday if I add like another unit or two. We'll see. But this isn't a spot where I'm looking to get involved. I do favor Jacoby. I think it's lined about appropriately. I think Jacoby's just the more diverse striker. I think he could get off with leg kicks here. Obviously, Oleksiejczuk, it has the boxing power. He's a technical boxer, but he just headhunts too much. He doesn't really mix it up whatsoever. Not going to look to grapple either. So I favor Jacoby. I think it's Jacoby by decision. So in that aspect, in that scenario, I'm not really looking to target him on DraftKings just because he is a little bit pricey. And I think, there's just relative to his range, I think he's a little bit overpriced because there's so many other high upside guys priced around him. So I'm not super interested in this fight as a whole, and no bet for me either.
Yeah, Martian on paper, it's only what, a 3-inch height advantage, a 2-inch reach advantage for Dustin Jacoby. But Jacoby's kind of a guy who uses his length pretty well fights behind his jab, has a pretty wide array of kicks, including a bunch of calf kicks. So on paper, it's not like a massive size advantage, but I have a feeling that we'll see a lot of Dustin Jacoby kind of utilizing his range to stay out of, the big left hand from Nzechukwu here. Have seen a little bit of love for the underdog this weekend, especially early in the week, but seems like the line is moving a little bit towards Dustin Jacoby, the favorite right now. Any action for you, Martian, in the first fight of the night?
Yeah, nothing that really catches my eye too much. I'd say the over is probably the best bet, in my opinion. Um, the money line probably about right. I think that McCall is going to really need to get his boxing to the body here to win this fight, because I think if it's at a typical Jacoby distance range type of fight, Jacoby's just going to land a little bit better, win the rounds, and the judges do like Jacoby. He obviously had that decision against Max Grisham go his way that a lot of people thought Grisham won that fight. So I think the judges like Jacoby's style, and McCall's going to have to put on a really great pressure performance, mixing that boxing into the head and the body. And I just don't see him really doing that here. And I agree with what John said about the DraftKings. 8,600 for Jacoby, not a good price, because this guy only really typically wins decisions with like maybe 70, 80 strikes, and not really much finishing upside. I think the only chance this fight finishes is probably going to be a McCall knockout, and I don't think that's too high of a chance either. So the over at even money, I'd say, is probably the bet to make here.
Yeah, and shout out to John with the new graphics on the screen. You can see about -145, the consensus price on this fight to hit the judges' scorecards. Early in the week, I didn't really have much of an opinion on this fight. I thought Dustin Jacoby would probably be able to utilize his length and kind of kickbox to a decision. I thought, Jacoby decision like plus 300 range was a solid look. It's coming a little bit. If I had to bet a side on the money line, I actually think I would lay it with the favorite here. I just don't think there's a ton of guys in the UFC who are going to win a kickboxing match against Dustin Jacoby. And McCall, he doesn't really bring a ton of tools. Obviously, he's got a really good hand speed for the weight class. Part of that comes with being a little bit undersized, I think. Clearly hits hard, but I don't think he's like the type to mix in a takedown attempt or two, or even get the fight to the ground. Like, I think he's kind of going to give Dustin Jacoby the type of fight that Jacoby wants. So I'm not going to lay -200, I don't think. But if I had to bet a side, I do think Dustin Jacoby is kind of the rightful favorite here in the -200, -210 range as of Thursday night. Let's move on to the second fight of the night here. We got Devontae Smith, currently a -150 favorite. He's 8.5K on DK. Takes on Ludwig Klein, who takes the fight on a little bit of short notice here. He's plus 130, 7.7K. Super interesting market in terms of the betting. Ludwig Klein opened plus 150, plus 160 in some spots. Shout out to you if you were able to snag those prices, but it's clearly taken a lot of action. He's down to plus 130 now. John Martian, Devontae Smith has not really been a guy who's easy to trust as a favorite, but I tend to think that he's going to win this fight on Saturday night. It's just a matter of, can you lay -150 on a guy like Devontae Smith, who, when the going gets rough, has not necessarily made it through adversity well throughout his UFC career.
Yeah, I mean, any guy who gets knocked out by Kama Worthy, I'm looking to be skeptical of as a favorite. He did kind of just collapse as a favorite in his last fight against Mullarkey too, but I don't really know what to make of Klein. He's going up in weight for this fight, former 145er. I think he probably has some experience at 155, but pretty rough start to his UFC career. Got beat as a huge favorite by Nate Landwehr in his last fight, and he's coming in here on less than a week's notice. I don't think he was training for a fight coming up either, so who really knows what type of cardio and shape that Klein's going to be in here. His back's kind of up against the wall in the UFC. He's 1-2. This is likely his last fight on the contract. So, he's really gambling here with this spot. And I don't really know what to make of it, because there's so much short notice and intangibles here. So I guess I'll lean with Smith to win as a pick, based on the fact that he's had the advantage in terms of preparing for this fight. But Smith has also never won a decision, never won a 3-round decision in MMA. So this guy is not to be trusted late. I don't know if you can really trust him as a favorite either. But Klein seems pretty, knockout or bust here. So hard fight to get a read on.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And then, John Kelly, I'll kick it to you. I know you had an underdog play. Obviously, you did your underdog video yesterday. I'll let you plug that and your new promo code with underdog. But I just wanted to ask you, I know you had an underdog play on this fight, something that stood out to you in terms of the grappling, which is something that we haven't really touched on. So curious your thoughts on kind of the fight as a whole, and then more specifically kind of what you're doing in those DFS prop streets.
Yeah, for sure. So I backed it. First off, I backed Ludwig Klein at the money line for 1.5 units at plus 138, I think was the number I got on FanDuel. It's kind of bounced around this week, but I do think, probably any plus money, I'm willing to back Klein here, just because Smith, while he's a good boxer, fast hands, he's got power, it's really, that's all he has. You know, there's nothing, there's no other level to his game. He's a fish out of water on the mat, doesn't have any sense of grappling. He's not going to look to wrestle or grapple offensively either. And the cardio just falls off a cliff after about 5 to 7 minutes. So he's just completely untrustworthy. And it's not that Ludovit Klein is like this superstar prospect. You know, obviously he looked great when he came into UFC, knocked out, who was it? Shane Young.
Shane Young.
Yeah, I think we both bet Shane Young there, so we were just like devastated. But yeah, and then after that, obviously he's come crashing back down to earth. Most recently getting out grappled by Nate Landwehr. But I do think, to your point, or to your plug, in that Ludovit Klein, I think, could land takedowns here. I'm not sure if he will right away, but it's just like how I see the fight playing out. I think both guys are powerful. Both guys could win in round 1. And outside of that, I think both guys have bad cardio. I'm going to lean with the guy who I think can land multiple takedowns. We've seen him land multiple takedowns in other fights, and if Smith's cardio is going to fall off a cliff anyway, like he can take this dude down once or twice. So yeah, you mentioned the underdog video I did. Klein on the rival side, minus 0.5 takedowns versus Smith. I don't think Smith's going to even look to land one. So you're basically just asking yourself if Klein can land a takedown. I think he does if it doesn't end like immediately on one of the first couple strikes. So yeah, check that out on my YouTube channel. Did my underdog video for them, and 100% deposit match on promo code John Kelly. Just a quick plug there. But yeah, so I backed Klein at the money line for 1.5 units, and I think he could potentially have some wrestling upside here as well.
Yeah, we got to get the plug in early in the show. Second fight of the night. Third fight of the night, we'll tell people to hit the subscribe button to like the video. Second fight of the night, we stick to the underdog plug. In all seriousness, my pick on this fight, you know, I think that I'll take Devontae Smith. I think he's a little bit more trustworthy in the early rounds. You know, I will say he has really struggled in terms of facing adversity. I kind of teased that in the open to this fight. I mean, the Kama Worthy fight goes 4 minutes. They have an extensive training history together, but like Kama Worthy's coming in super short notice, massive underdog. I believe he was the biggest upset of whatever 2018, 2019, whatever year that was in his UFC debut, was one of the biggest betting upsets of the entire year. And then other than that, man, like the Jamie Mullarkey fight, I had a bet on Mullarkey there. He just really broke Smith in the second round, started going to the body, and Devontae didn't really want to be there anymore. And in terms of his 3 UFC wins, you know, they're against decent names. Like he did beat Julian Erosa, but they're like early dunks, man. Like he gets you out of there early, and he's capable of doing that in this matchup, I think. You know, he does so with ease, but anytime the going gets rough, I haven't really seen anything that would give me confidence in Devontae Smith. But if you want a little more confidence on the play that John plugged, if John telling you that the underdog goods isn't good enough for you, I would say go back and watch the John Gunther fight from like 2017, where Devontae Smith just gets like dragged around the octagon and finished in the 3rd round. He's really struggled with facing adversity throughout his whole career. So I'll pick him at minus 150, but you won't catch me laying the chalk this weekend on a guy who I don't really trust to win a fight if the going gets rough. So that's my take on the fight. Let's move on to the 3rd fight of the evening. Hopefully some spicy takes here. I know I certainly got one. We got Tagir Ulanbekov, who's undefeated in the UFC. He's 2-0, minus 240, 9K flat on DK against Tim Elliott, who comes back plus 195, 7.2K for Tim Elliott. And I'll go first here. You know, I got in a pretty good bet on Tim Elliott early in the week. I bet him for 2 units at plus 220, which is, you know, about as big a bet as I go on a sizable underdog. I just think this is a much closer fight than the odds indicate. The market has kind of agreed with me throughout the early portion of the week. Tim's come in to about plus 185, plus 190 on some of the sharper books out there making lines. But, you know, maybe I've got too much faith in a 35-year-old Tim Elliott, who's kind of always susceptible to going out there and making some questionable IQ decisions. But I'm just mostly not sold on Tagir Ulanbekov. You know, he's 2-0 inside the UFC on paper, and I scored both fights for him, but certainly 2 pretty close fights. You know, first fight against Bruno Silva, a guy who has since gone on to win a fight or 2 in the UFC, but Bruno Silva, not a super highly touted prospect. Ulanbekov, a big favorite in that matchup, as he was his second matchup, and just kind of, you know, I don't want to say he goes life and death with Bruno Silva, but the fight is close. There's a lot of scrambles. He's put on his back. I struggled with leg kicks a lot in that matchup, which is something that, you know, Tim Elliott, I will not praise his striking much, but one thing I will say about Tim Elliott's striking is he's pretty reliable to kick the calf early and often in this spot. So I think that could give Tagir some issues. And then his second fight, you know, was a tough fight to score. You know, he put Alan Nascimento on his back for long periods of time, but he's one of those guys who Tagir doesn't really pass when he's on top. He very much stays in full guard, lane prey guy, does not do a lot of damage on top. And I honestly think he hasn't faced a scrambler at the level of Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott, there are not very many guys who have gone out there and watched Tim Elliott in terms of the wrestling. I mean, even Askar Askarov is going to compete for a title here soon, potentially at 125 pounds. Tim Elliott hit some really nice takedowns on him. You look at the Demetrius Johnson fight. I mean, DJ, I would certainly say, got the best of Tim Elliott in that matchup for sure in their title fight a while back, but it's not like Tim Elliott is completely clueless on the ground. Like, there are very few guys who have gone out there and really been able to hold him down or not let him take them down. So I think Tim Elliott's a really great spot this weekend. I think the fight's almost close to a coin flip. It feels dangerous saying that with a plus 200 underdog, but I really think Tim Elliott's going to make this fight really competitive. Also, in terms of underdog, I thought Tim Elliott plus 2.5 takedowns in this matchup. So he just can't get outlanded in terms of takedowns by 3. I think that's a really good spot. We've already seen Tagir put on his back by both of his UFC opponents and kind of lose some scrambling position. So a lot of faith in me for a guy who is pretty shitty striking and is susceptible to dive into a guillotine at any moment. But fuck it, I'm riding with my guy Tim Elliott this weekend, plus 220 for 2 units. Martian, I know you had similar thoughts on the fight as I did. Did you end up getting involved with Tim Elliott, or are you kind of waiting around to see if you're going to end up firing in the end?
Yeah, I bet him early in the week as well, but I only went 0.75 units. I got him at I think the best price of plus 225 on FanDuel, right after the event ended last week. And looking at the DraftKings price, I mean, Ulanbekov at 9,000, man, that's not a good play. I really don't think anything outside of a round 1 guillotine he's going to be covering that price tag. He just doesn't do a whole lot on top. Jonah was saying this lay and pray. That's a really good term for this guy. And at flyweight where guys can just scramble and they can do a whole lot, that's just not a good style. How often do we see guys off their back for multiple minutes in a round and they actually win that round? Because Alan Nascimento won round 2 unanimously by all 3 judges, and all he was doing was laying on his back, throwing elbows, but Ulanbekov just doing nothing on top. So I think the wrestling here will be really competitive. Tim is going to be pumping out volume on the feet, like you said, and I think he'll just fight for our money at plus 220. The Nicolau fight, he started really strong in that fight, kind of wilted late in round 3, and that's really the only reason I didn't go bigger on him like you did, Jonah, is because that questionable decision making in round 3 there, just laying on his back for long periods of time. I do have a bit of a fear that could come into fruition again. So I still think you can't be too wrong at Elliott at over 2-1 though.
I agree. John Kelly, will you please make it 3 for 3 on the Tim Elliott train?
Yeah, you already know. You don't even have to ask me. Just assume that I blind bet Tim Elliott, especially at these odds. Martian, 225, that's an excellent number. I got in at plus 194, so not quite as good as you guys. Go figure. I'm always behind everybody else. But I do still think the number's really good, honestly. Like you mentioned a couple things that I want to talk about is outside of the durability, which is a concern for Tim Elliott, of course. The optics are never good. The fight IQ is a bit of a concern as well. Outside of those intangible things, just take those away, skill for skill, I think Tim Elliott's better. I think he's going to be throwing more volume on the feet. I think he's a better striker. You mentioned the leg kicks, which Ulanbekov has been susceptible to in the past. I think Elliott's going to throw more volume. I think he's going to be winning the striking. And I actually think he could be the one landing more takedowns too. And it's not that I don't think he could be taken down, especially if he jumps guillotine or just accepts playing off his back once or twice. But I do think there's going to be some exciting scrambles. I favor Tim Elliott in those scrambles. You mentioned the level of competition for Ulanbekov. Like you said, he's having close grappling matches with Bruno Silva, Alan Nascimento, who won a round or 2 off of his back in that fight. Going from those guys to a guy with high-level wrestling background, who's going to be doing more on the feet as well, I feel like you just have to back Tim Elliott, even knowing that he might put himself in some sketchy spots here, or maybe his optics don't look great in round 3. But, in the plus 200 range, that's stuff I'm not even worried about. I think he has clear upside to look like a favorite in this matchup, so it's kind of like a blind bet scenario. I backed him for 1.25 units, plus 194, and when it comes to DraftKings, everybody that's been playing DraftKings for at least a couple years knows the type of upside that he has. He's formerly one of the guys that held the records for how many DraftKings points he scored, and that was before the scoring change on DraftKings, where it was harder to score as many points. So I mean, he's going to be definitely one of the cheaper guys that you want to look to, just because he has that type of upside, the slate breaking upside. But yeah, I'm making it 3 for 3 with our guy Tim Elliott. We ride this week.
You love to see it. And I know the price is coming a little bit, John. I think you said plus 194. The downside of us doing our show on Thursday is oftentimes we come on and we give a take, and then the line is already moved kind of from when we bet it. And obviously that's happened a little bit, but I really think like Tim Elliott's good to like the plus 170, plus 160 range. Like I think there's room to go on Tim Elliott here in terms of betting. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on, Martian said he didn't think that Ulanbekov was a strong play on DK at 9K. And not only do I agree with that, but I'll take it a little step further. Like Tim Elliott, John Kelly, like you mentioned, like he is DraftKings gold. This is a guy who has scored 130 points in 3-round fights 3 times in his career. Like those are insane numbers to put up. I'm not saying he's going to do that here, but at $7,200, man, he doesn't even have to come close to that to get optimal, even on a 13-fight slate. And honestly, the past few weeks, I wrote about this in my article that'll come out tomorrow at FTN Daily, kind of just talking about the DFS slate in general. I feel like we've been picking in the 7K range, these guys who just aren't going to lose you the slate, like people who we think are going to be competitive, but hopefully just don't lose you the slate, and then you make it up towards the top with the more expensive fighters, the more reliable fighters. And we've had a couple weeks like Jim Miller week where I locked him and obviously binked on DK, but I truly feel like the underdogs on DraftKings this weekend are going to be able to win you a slate. Like I think that Tim Elliott could win this slate, as opposed to just not burying you and scoring 50 points or 70 points in a win. Like I legitimately think Tim Elliott can break a slate at $7,200. And I feel that way about one or two other underdogs on the slate. So I kind of think that'll be a theme of something we'll talk about throughout the night, but we do have a bunch more fights to go. Let's keep it moving here. We got Umar Nurmagomedov, by far the biggest favorite on the card. He's minus 675, almost at minus 700 in some spots. He's the most expensive fighter on DraftKings as well, obviously. 9.6K. He takes on Brian Boom Kelleher, who comes back plus 475. 6.6K on DK for Boom Kelleher. And I'll go first here, and I'll keep it short. I'm not necessarily sold that like Umar Nurmagomedov is this guy who's going to be a future UFC champ within the next year or two. But if you just look at his UFC debut against Sergey Morozov, he's very impressive. I mean, he has the kicks at range, is a really kind of unorthodox kicking style where he'll throw from weird angles, comes at you with a lot of different approaches on the feet. And then his wrestling is obviously good. I know Sergey Morozov lost his last fight, but that's a guy who can really grapple, and Umar was able to get to good dominant positions on him, obviously found the tap in the second round. So I think Umar's pretty much the real deal. I'm not going to say he's like a future champion right now, but against a guy on Brian Kelleher's level, even at 145 pounds, man, I have trouble seeing this fight be competitive on Saturday. So I'll pass. I think Nurmagomedov, the biggest question here, in my opinion, is what to do with Nurmagomedov on DraftKings. Because like I mentioned, I think there's a lot of viable underdogs, so you're going to have salary, but I'm not sure that Nurmagomedov is worth it at 9.6K. John Kelly, your thoughts on Nurmagomedov as a DFS option? And then obviously, I think you're a little bit higher on him as a prospect overall than I am.
Yeah, for sure. And I do like him in this matchup. I favor him quite a bit. I think he could win this fight pretty much wherever it goes. Like, I think he's a much better striker. That's the thing about Umar Nurmagomedov is it's not just the high-level grappling that you have to worry about. He has the high-level striking as well to go with it. And I think that's key in this matchup against Kelleher, who doesn't throw a ton of volume. Like, it really comes down to how often you think I keep saying Kelleher for some reason. How often you think Brian can land a big punch or snatch up a guillotine, because that's basically the only way he wins this fight. And I honestly don't think either of those happen very often. Like I really think Umar wins this fight at like 90% of the time, maybe even higher. So the way I played it, and the reason I didn't play Umar inside the distance, I played the under 2.5 at plus 120. Just because the Umar inside the distance was not much better. Like the number was barely even different. And I'm just getting a little bit of a safety net if, he randomly gets injured, or if Kelleher does happen to pull off that magical upset, which, like I said, I don't think that happens. But because the number wasn't very different, I'd rather take the under 2.5. And it's still plus money, plus 120. This is a fight that I'm expecting to end. I think Nurmagomedov takes it to the ground. I think he submits Brian Kelleher, and like both of these guys, like obviously the upside for Nurmagomedov is the grappling. He needs to get a finish at 9,600, and he certainly can do that. It's just I don't know if he Yeah, I don't know if even in a finish, like even if he does what he's supposed to do, I still don't know if that's going to be optimal on the slate just because there's so many high upside fights to target. Like even if he puts up 100 points, like that just might not do it for you at 9,600, especially when there's multiple other people for a cheaper price that can probably put up 100 or more points as well. So I'm definitely going to have some exposure depending on how many lineups I do. I haven't really decided. I might ramp up the volume for the big pay-per-view this week. We'll see, but definitely going to have some exposure, but he's not going to be a core play for me, even though I do think he finishes, and I do think he's future champ material.
All right, Martian, anything from you here?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you guys. I'll say that I think that Umar is probably worth the price on DraftKings. Just looking at the other fighters at 9K or above, I think he does have the highest upside to not only finish but also rack up a lot of takedowns. He got a very high amount of takedowns against Morozov in a short amount of time. Almost got a knockdown there too on the feet. And Kelleher was just losing minutes to Kevin Kroom on the feet. I don't think that he's going to be in a good position on the feet here at all. If you have any faith in Kelleher, just stab on that knockout prop at like 14-1. I don't think he can win the fight in any other way. And it's really just a matter of, does Umar finish or does he win by decision? And, considering just the tenacious wrestling to back take style that Umar has, I think he's going to be getting takedowns, back takes. And Kelleher has had some questionable moments with his grappling. That armbar versus Marlon Vera way back in the day, just not a good position that he got subbed in. And I feel like that's, susceptible to getting caught again. So I'll go with Umar to get the sub here. Last thing I'll say is Umar barely throws any ground and pound. I was really shocked about that, about how little ground and pound he throws. So I'm pretty confident that the sub at like plus 210 is going to be the side here. And I don't see, think it might be worth to go to the sub for that 2-1 instead of the inside the distance or something. So I think Umar is going to, get a rear naked choke here.
Agreed on all fronts. Let's move on to a grudge match, not necessarily the featured grudge match that everyone's tuning in for, but certainly some heat behind this matchup. We know, obviously, in the main event, we got Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal with their American top team beef, but there's another American top team beef on this card. And John Martian, I know you had a take on this fight for sure, so I'll introduce it and then I'll kick it straight to you because I know you feel pretty strongly about a side here. We got Maria Agapova. She's minus 190 on 8.8K on DraftKings. Some of you guys may know her as being the biggest victim of the biggest upset last year by Shayna Dobson inside the octagon, but she bounced back with a win over Sabina Mazo her last time out. She takes on Marina Moroz, who we haven't really seen in a long time, but certainly a step up in competition, I think, from Mazo, and she's plus 160, 7.4K. Martian, I know you got in early on this fight earlier in the week, so I'm curious your thought process here.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I am Ukrainian. I am like 25% Ukrainian, so that is a huge bias going on right now. But I gotta go with my girl Moroz here. I think that she's definitely the side to be on. I got in at plus 180 earlier in the week. It was the other bet I logged in was Elliott, and then I logged Moroz in right after the card last time. And I think that she's going to be showing some improvements here. I'm going to trust the version that we saw of her in 2019, 2020. And that's a girl who just knows how to get the fight into the clinch, knows how to get takedowns at the right time, and does pretty good work from top as well. So I think she knows where her strong suit is in this matchup. She knows that Agapova is a dangerous fighter at distance. And at distance, Moroz is going to be in a bit of trouble. Agapova has really good speed. She knows how to fight and moving backwards. She throws punches and kicks with some decent technique and really good speed as well. So I respect Agapova's distance striking here and recognize that Moroz is going to be in trouble, but she just fought a very similar matchup to this in Bueno Silva in her last fight. It was about 2 years ago. But Bueno Silva, dangerous fighter at range, landed a lot of strikes. I think the stats credit her with like 130 strikes or something like that. And Moroz still won that decision pretty comfortably because she got takedowns at the right time. She threw a lot of elbows from top position. She's good on top. And I think that she's, very live to do that again here. The odds with Agapova going all over the place, minus 1,000 to plus 180 last fight where she looked like a huge favorite. And now she's another considered favorite over Moroz. And Moroz hasn't fought in 2 years, but She has been preparing for multiple fights. She had 4 fights booked. She's been training at ATT the entire time. A lot of good women fighters down at ATT. The real ATT, Agapova trains at ATT Sunrise, which is, the fake ATT.
She was kicked out of the real ATT.
Right. I heard. Yeah, I mean, she was asking people for crack money in like the streets or something like that. There is video of that. I'm not making this shit up. And Moroz's Instagram is worth the research, gentlemen. I'll tell you that. So I got the Ukrainian here. The fighting spirit of the Ukraine is going to be flowing through her veins, and I think that she's going to win a nice 29-28 decision here.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Martian, like you mentioned, it's almost been 2 years to the day when they'll fight. I believe it's been like a year and 51 weeks since her last fight. That is Moroz's last fight. She did have 4 fights scheduled. They all fell through. That OnlyFans money is certainly coming in handy, but apparently she wants to get back in the cage this weekend. John Kelly, your thoughts on the matchup?
Yeah, first off, thanks for sending me that login for that research on her OnlyFans. But yeah, no, this is a fight where it's like I don't have a super strong take. Like I do think it, like if I had to bet a side, it'd probably be the dog here. But at the same time, like Agapova really impressed me her last time out to where I'm not like rushing to fade her. I do think it's a winnable matchup for Moroz, but I also have some concerns. Like Agapova, I think, is going to be landing the bigger shots while the fight plays out on the feet. And I do think it does primarily play out on the feet. It just comes down to how often do you think Moroz can land a couple takedowns here? I do think she lands probably 1, maybe 2 takedowns. But outside of that, like, I don't know, man. It's just one that I really don't have a strong read on. Like, gun to my head, I'll take the dog, but it's not a strong take either way. Agapova looked really good, and that's kind of my hesitancy on wanting to take the underdog shot. I just think there's a lot of underdogs that you can make a strong case for, and I think she's one where it's just like, yeah, she's probably a decent underdog. Like if this were a card where there wasn't so many spots, then maybe I'd think harder about it, but I guess I lean Agapova. But on the betting side, I'm not laying juice with her, especially like if this fight becomes like if she's going to come out and blow her load like she did against Shayna Dobson and just fight like super emotionally and try to get like a finish or commit murder, whatever she plans on doing that night, like that cardio is not going to hold up. She can't hold that high of a pace over, even longer than 5 minutes. So, and if that does happen, then Moroz could definitely, all she needs to do is land 1 takedown. She could probably lay on her. That's probably an entire round. So there's just a lot of ways that I think this could go bad if you're looking at the favorite. So I'm just going to hit a pass. I think there's better spots on the card.
Yeah, I'll pick Agapova as well. I just think she's a little bit more athletic, offers a little bit more danger. But one thing I will say, the only action I have so far on the fight is I played on underdog. I played Moroz in terms of the rivals. I just said Moroz would have more takedowns, a push. If they push, then it's a push, obviously. And if Moroz lands 1 and Agapova lands 0, I win my bet. Moroz not someone who has historically wrestled a ton. I think she averages like half a takedown per 15 minutes, but has not only landed 3 takedowns over her last 2 fights, but she shot like 17 takedowns, which means 2 things. A, she's a pretty bad wrestler because she's attempting a lot of takedowns and not getting her opponent down, but at least she's trying to. And in this matchup, I can't really imagine that she's going to be out there shooting takedowns against like Mayra Bueno Silva and then not shooting them against Agapova. And Agapova is someone who on Contender Series really struggled with the wrestling of Tracy Cortez. Shayna Dobson takes you down twice. I think Marina Moroz is going to be able to, assuming she shoots at least 3 times in this matchup. So I think Moroz has a little bit of upside in terms of the takedown department. I'll obviously be rooting for Martian's bet, but no action for me in terms of the betting market. We can move on now to John's girl, or John's guy, I should say. We got, first of all, we'll go with the favorite. We got Kennedy and Nzechukwu. He's minus 135, 8.4K flat on DK. And takes on Nikolai Negumereanu, who John cashed a big underdog ticket on his last time out, I believe. He's plus 115, $7.8 thousand on DK. Is Nikolai. And John, I will let you go first here. You've kind of been, there's a couple fighters where we consider you the whisperer of them. I think that Nikolai Negumereanu may fall into that category. I assume you'll be going full screen for this matchup. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, well, first off, it wasn't the last time out, because the last time out, he pounded Ike Villanueva into the canvas for a first-round stoppage. Like, the guy just cannot be stopped ever since the Safarov loss. Like, clearly he's leveled up. He's coming for the belt. No, I honestly, like, when it comes down to this matchup, like, I really don't think either fighter is that good. But I do think that there is a valuable bet here. And the way what I played is fight starts round 3 at -110. I played that for a unit and a half. And this is a spot where neither guy is overly aggressive. Like, yeah, you look up and down the record, but Negumereanu really fought just like UPS drivers. Like he didn't fight anybody. Like, yes, he has the finishes, but that's against extremely low level competition. And now you've seen him at the UFC. He had 2 decisions, and then he beat Ike Villanueva, who literally gets finished inside of 2 rounds in all of his losses. So that it doesn't mean he's like some crazy overly aggressive finisher. And then on the flip side, Nzechukwu has a couple UFC finishes as well, but they were always when his opponent just completely death gassed. And I don't think that's going to happen here. I think this is going to be kind of a slower pace. I think Nikolai's going to be moving forward, doing more, at least early in the fight. But the reason why I don't have a bet on my guy is because the line is just way too, like, you're not getting a good enough number. I didn't even consider betting him here, just because it's like close. I think it's like close to a pick 'em. I think he's like plus 118 or something like that. I would need like plus 150 to even like remotely consider him. Yeah, I guess you can make a case that maybe he lands a takedown or 2 here, but his wrestling is really not that good. I know he comes from like a Romanian wrestling background. I do think he would have a grappling edge, but Nzechukwu, while he has given up takedowns, he's been difficult to control, and he's just so tall, he can get right back up and work back to his feet. This is just one where I think it's going to be ugly. It's going to be low volume, low pace. Nzechukwu is going to be backed up against the fence. Maybe Nikolai cage pushes him, tries to get him down, doesn't work, where it's just a lot of stalling going on. So fight starts round 3, -110. I feel really good about that. I think it's just because they're both coming off of first round stoppages on either side. I think, up and down the record, people are like, oh, well, typically they finish. Let's line it at this. When I think that's completely wrong. I think more than likely this goes all 15 minutes, but definitely I think it starts round 3. So that's the way I played it. I feel pretty good about that prop.
Yeah, John, you mentioned that you kind of had no interest in betting the Nikolai money line, but I don't want to say you're alone in that thought, but there's certainly a lot of people who do have interest. I'll put it that way. It was like plus 135 when limits kind of expanded about last week on whatever, Saturday night, Sunday morning, has come in all the way to plus 115, as you mentioned. So there's certainly some Nikolai love out there in the market. Not coming from you. I know you're on the over here. That's taking a little bit of money as well. The market agreeing with you. Martian, do you have any takes on this fight? Because to me, it kind of just feels like one of those shit shows that I want no part of. But John makes a compelling case for the over. Anything from you, Martian?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with John. I think that this fight is, mispriced in terms of like the fight extending longer. I think the over should probably be at 2.5 instead of 1.5. I do think we're probably going to be seeing the decision here, just because neither guy is a huge hitter. I just don't think they don't have a huge amount of power punches behind them. And, I should be like a boxing match for the most part. Kennedy is probably the more diverse striker. But I have done some extensive research on Fortis MMA. I'm telling you this. This is a proven and tested theory that when they're coming off of losses, much better fighters than when they're coming off of wins. They get very content quickly down there at Fortis MMA. We saw Ramiz Brahima last weekend, right? Coming off a loss, bat out of hell, comes out, gets that win right away. And Nzechukwu off that Dalan Jung knockout is going to be extremely motivated. Safe Sayu is going to be telling him to throw the 22 laser. It's going to be landing. And I think that Kennedy is probably going to win the fight. I kind of have some love for Nurmagomedov. I cashed on him on Kelleher, just like John did. And I'm grateful for that. But I think that, the guy is, we don't really know where his skill set is at. We've only seen a smaller sample size. I think there's a much more footage out there of Kennedy. So I think we have a better idea. And I've actually had the pleasure of seeing Kennedy fight live 2 times. 2019, I saw him fight 2 times. Just a magical experience for me both times. And, I'll be picking Kennedy to get a 29-28. I'm on the over here, by the way, over 1.5. I think it goes over 1.5 more like 70% of the time instead of, 62 or whatever it's at now. So I like the over here.
Martian, your dry humor cracks me up. I also had the pleasure of of watching Kennedy live, except he got knocked out pretty brutally by Daun Jung late last year. What was it, like November at the Apex? And it was pretty dead silent in there, except for
I loved
Kennedy.
it.
Yeah, just getting.
I had a 2.5 unit bet on Jung there, one of my biggest all last year. So
Yeah, I certainly regret passing there. That was like an elbow out of hell. But in terms of how I kind of see this fight, you guys both make compelling cases for the over. It's one of those things where I kind of wanted minus 150. Like that was my target before kind of looking at the market. And I knew that there was some love for it in the market going into looking kind of where the line had moved. And I was almost relieved to see that it had kind of fallen out of the range of minus 150. It's now like minus 160. I'm kind of looking for any excuse to just not have money on this fight. Like I don't trust Nikolai at all. All his tape pre UFC is like him fighting just absolute like cans on the regional scene. And then he beats, he comes in here, is a big favorite, I should say, against Safarov, gets embarrassed, and then comes back with 2 wins, one of them over Ike Villanueva, who I really don't rate at all. And then, Kennedy is a good athlete. He's a durable guy. I actually don't think he's terrible when he lets his hands go, but he's so content doing nothing for large periods of fights except for just holding his high guard. So I guess in theory, if I had to make a play, I would join you guys on the over, but the good news for me is I'd get to have $0 invested on this fight. I also think it's a pretty solid fade on DraftKings, actually.
Mhm.
I think people will look at the fight being, favored to go, favored to finish inside the distance, and I'll kind of get my angle of the fight going over just by fading it on DraftKings. So if I run 150 lineups, I'll probably have some exposure here and there, but certainly not a fight that I'm looking to really target either guy on. We got a 26 fighter pool, and these two are not going to make the top of the list in terms of my exposures this weekend. Let's move on to a really good fight, a fight that, in my opinion, should be opening the main card. We got Marina Rodriguez currently minus 260. She's $9.3 thousand on DK against Yan Xiaonan, who comes back plus 210, 6.9K for Yan Xiaonan. Really interesting matchup here. Figures to be a pretty fun, striking matchup, I would think, at least on the Marina Rodriguez side. We know that's where she wants to keep fight. She's coming off of a main event win over Mackenzie Dern, where she faced some serious adversity on the ground, which she is she's been known to do throughout her UFC career. I'll put it that way. But bounced back, got the win over Dern. She's running a 3-fight win streak. Potentially could be looking at a title shot with a win this weekend. And then Yan Xiaonan, someone who was undefeated in the UFC, had a lot of hype behind her name. Of course, the Cookie Monster came in as an underdog. Had to stop the hype train. Pretty much got her out of there in pretty brutal fashion, I will say. But Yan hasn't fought in a minute. I think she has the skill set to make this fight close. She's a big underdog at plus 210, but I tend to lean with Marina Rodriguez. That's just my quick take on the fight. I think Marina's a little bit better of a striker, but I do think that Marina's finishing abilities maybe a little bit overstated here. You look at her record. She certainly has a few knockouts. Amanda Hebos knockout was obviously huge for her career on pay-per-view. Basically knocked her out twice due to Herb Dean's incompetence. But you look at Yan and her last fight. Yeah, she got finished due to KO on the ground in the second round, but it wasn't a deal where like she took a ton of damage on the feet and like isn't durable. So I kind of think that a lot of people are overrating Marina's ability to finish this fight potentially. Martian, I know that you have a bet, I think you have a bet on the prop markets in terms of this fight. So I'm curious your thoughts. I'll let you go first here, Martian. Xiaonan versus Rodriguez.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what you just said about the durability. I don't think that, Rodriguez is a huge hitter. I think she does have that one knockout over Ribas. So that was just kind of a perfect punch type of thing. And Shannon is fairly durable enough. And, I was kind of early in the week thinking, Shannon might be value, but, rewatching some of her footage, just really underwhelming. Had a really close decision over Angela Hill. Beat the ghost of Kovacevic in an impressive performance, but, obviously dominated by his spars. I just don't think she's done anything, that, exceptional in the UFC. And, just Chinese fighters in the UFC have been having a rough run lately since the past 2 years. I mean, you could look up the stats behind this. I would guess their record is like 5 wins, 15 losses in the past year and a half, 2 years. I just don't think the level of MMA over there is that high. Marina very active in 2021, 5-round fights. Her takedown defense is steadily improving. I think Shannon's chance of winning is getting takedowns, but all she really does is get a little trip takedown in the clinch, and she doesn't do a whole lot on top. Kind of just lays and prays. And I think that Marina is skilled enough in the clinch. She's going to be using her offensive weapons in the clinch. And I don't think she's going to get taken down here. So I think Marina is probably going to cruise her way to either 30-27 or 29-28 pretty clearly decision here. So I like Marina by decision at even money. I think that's worth a bet, a unit or two, honestly.
Yeah, harsh review for you there on Yan Xiaonan. Maybe you're just a little salty that she beat up our girl Angela Hill, but we'll move on.
Hey, none of that Angela Hill slander. I
Hey,
cannot do that.
hey, there'll be no Angela Hill slander from me on the show. If anyone's going to be slandering Angie Hill, it might be John Kelly. But Martian,
Who doesn't? Who in the
who
right
doesn't?
mind doesn't?
Dude. Angela Hill's got some haters, I'll tell you that, but I'm certainly not one of them. Maybe we got none of them on the podcast. That's good to see. A lot of Angie Hill love over here. Overkill Hill stands on the Undisputed Show. But in all seriousness, back to the matchup, John. Martian mentioned like he thinks that Jan is going to need to land takedowns in order to win this fight. I feel like that's kind of the consensus agreement in this fight. Like Marina's been in bad spots. She saw it's 10-8 rounds to like a lot of girls. That's why she has multiple draws inside of the UFC. Yeah, Calvillo and the Marcos fight. I mean, or Marcos was a majority decision. I think there was a 28-28 mixed in there. Like she's been pretty dreadful when put on her back, and it's not really something that's improved. I'll give her credit for surviving against Mackenzie Dern, who probably has the best offensive jiu-jitsu in the division, if not women's MMA. But look, I think Jan's going to need multiple takedowns here. She has the ability to keep the fight close on the feet, sure, but I think it's pretty easy to favor Marina Rodriguez at minus 260, minus 300 if the fight stays standing for 15. Yes, the X factor here, John, is like how likely do you think it is that Jan lands takedowns? I know you mentioned to me earlier this week watching tape that you thought she had a decent shot with her body lock to get a takedown or two, but is that enough to win the fight? John, real quick for me. We're getting comments that your mic is muted, so we might swing back to you here.
My God. I muted it because I was typing, because they heard me typing. I knew I was going to forget to turn it back on. I was getting into the heat of things. I was rolling, and now I got to start all over.
Well, we'll back, and I could hear you in my ears, but I was just looking at the comments.
Okay, so you guys heard me.
Yeah,
we heard you.
All right, well, you guys got the goods then. Chat's going to get the shorter version. Basically, I think Rodriguez is being a little bit overvalued here. I backed Jan at the money line at plus 210 for a unit. I just think the striking is not going to be as much of a blowout as people think. And I think, at distance, it's not going to be like Rodriguez is clearly winning minutes. I think it's going to be like, maybe so-and-so won that round with a couple big moments. You know what I mean? Like at plus 210, I just think the fight's going to play out a lot closer than that line suggests. And then when things get close, like obviously Jan has to avoid the clinch, but in the pocket, like she's going to be landing multiple big shots here. She likes to follow up her heavy combination with the hands with the low kick as well. Like she's going to be giving volume back to Rodriguez. And then if you talk about the grappling, like I don't think she's a good grappler, doesn't have good takedowns. I'm not saying any of that. But I also don't think she has to be those things to be able to land a takedown or two against Marina Rodriguez. And if the rounds are close, if the striking's competitive, and then, maybe she gets a body lock and trips her to the ground at the end of a round, like that's probably going to steal the round, especially considering we know Rodriguez is not going to work back to her feet. She's literally just going to sit there on her back for the rest of the round. So I just think the line is just too wide here. Like, of course, I think Rodriguez should be a favorite, but I honestly think it should be like minus 150, maybe minus 160. Like I think this line is really just you're like buying into the recent hype on Rodriguez because she's been on a great run. And then obviously Jan, you mentioned the Carla Esparza fight coming off her loss where she just got out wrestled, but that's off the table here. It's going to be a striking match. I think there's value on the underdog here.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think you made a good point. Like, it's certainly a buy low spot on one fighter who's plus 210 and then a sell high on a fighter who's minus 260 in a fight that's honestly likely to stay standing. And, like, let's not pretend that Jan, like, most of her fights we prefer to stay standing. Like, if she stayed standing against Carla Esparza, who's probably going to get the next title shot in this weight class, she probably wins that fight more times than not. You know what I mean? So I do think it'll be a little bit more competitive on the feet. I'm not betting the fight. I think Marina makes sense. We had some comments in the chat about potentially betting the over or the goes the distance here, and also some comments from Josh in the chat saying that he thought that Jan could score well even in a loss on DraftKings. And while I agree with him, because I do think it could be one of those fights where it's back and forth and kind of even the loser, women's MMA, anything at distance is counted as a significant strike. It happens in men's MMA too, but women just throw way more volume if they're in a 15-minute stand-up affair. So I think it could be one of those situations. I'm not sure how much Jan will get to on DK, just because there's a lot of underdogs that I feel like really strongly about. Tim Elliott, we'll talk about Greg Hardy in a little bit, but I think there's some underdogs I prefer over Jan on DK. Last thing I'll mention on this fight, something I made money on last weekend. I wasn't able to watch the card, so I haven't actually seen the fight, but in the Jin Young Kim fight against Priscilla Cachoeira, I bet on underdog, I bet both of their over and significant strikes, and those are just correlated plays. You basically get plus 200 on them to get into a war because their overs are so correlated, right? If Priscilla Cachoeira lands 50 strikes, her opponent is probably going to land 80, and I feel like that could be a similar situation in this matchup. Obviously, a little bit more of a grappling threat this weekend than there was in the fight I was just talking about, but if these two ladies stand at distance for 15 minutes and there isn't a finish, I'm expecting like over 100 significant strikes on both sides. So that maybe that's something that people will be able to take advantage of as more of those DFS prop sites open throughout the week. It's only Thursday night now, so hopefully we get some options to bet those on Friday into Saturday morning. Let's move on to the feature prelim here. We got Jalen Turner minus 155, 8.2K against my guy, Jamie Mullarkey, who comes back plus 135, 8K flat on DraftKings. Before I kick it to you, Martian, this is one of those fights where 13 fights laid on DraftKings, obviously a ton of fighters in play, some really strong scoring options. These two fighters smack dab in the middle in terms of the pricing scale. One at 8.2K, one at 8K. John and I always talk about when it comes to this type of fight, if you have a really strong take on DraftKings, I think this is a spot where I don't want to say you go all in, but you make your opinion, you plant a flag somewhere in this fight. A lot of people have their ownership split. Usually the fights at 8.2K or 8K are the closest aligned in terms of the betting market. So people are likely to be split on DraftKings as well. And this is a spot where I think if you feel strongly about a side, you should really be able to register that type of opinion in the DFS market. So I'll just mention that before we get to the breakdown here. Martian, I'll let you go first. Any love here for Jalen Turner, the tarantula at minus 155, or Jamie Mullarkey's been getting the job done. He cashed us a big ticket last time out. I believe you were on that as well. Thoughts on the fight here in the feature prelim?
Yeah, I mean, great fight. I think this is a really good choice as like the fight before the pay-per-view. I think it's got, entertainment written all over it. Both these guys cashed as an underdog in their last fights. And I think it's a good example of like, sometimes we say like, oh, I prefer to live bet this guy, and I say that a lot sometimes. But then you also have the theory of, if they're a good live bet, they might be a good pre-fight bet as well. And I think that Mullarkey is a great example of what we saw against Smith in his last fight, where I bet him small before the fight, like plus 130, and then he got up to plus 200 or plus 300, and we were able to get some more in on the live lines. But then in retrospect, after the fight, Mullarkey was probably a good pre-fight bet as well. So I'm kind of feeling the same way about this one here, where it seems like I could see Mullarkey starting a bit slow, maybe getting his takedown stuffed early on. But then in rounds 2 and 3, I think his cardio, his pressure, his grappling could start to really add up, and then he could have an advantage late here. But both these guys are fairly durable. I'd say that the more dangerous striker of the two is definitely Turner. But we've seen Mullarkey eat a ton of damage and keep fighting. We haven't really ever seen Turner, too badly hurt by strikes. And Mullarkey not the biggest hitter, even though he has won 2 fights in a row by knockout. So I think this one is pretty likely to see, the later rounds, the over 1.5, kind of a confusing line for this one to be set at 1.5, in my opinion. So I like the over 1.5 here. I bet that earlier today for 1.5 units. I think we're going to see, a second, third, round, and I think we're probably going to see a decision here. In terms of like a pick, I really do not have a super confident lean, but I guess I'll go with the dog here, just because I think that pressure and that attritional work that he does could really add up in the second and third rounds. So I'll slightly lean Mullarkey, but really, really fun fight. I would be shocked to see this one not be really entertaining.
Yeah, and that says something, because you're picking the fight to go the distance, which is obviously an underdog, and you still think it'll be entertaining. This is the type of fight, this has nothing to do with betting. Like, this to me brings like pay-per-view cards together. Like, you have some really good prelims on ESPN, then you kick it over to the pay-per-view. Like, this is just a fight that I have a hard time seeing it disappoint on Saturday night as well. John Kelly, anything for you here? I think it's an interesting matchup, maybe not on the money line in terms of the betting market, but there are a couple of props that I know caught my eye that I'll talk about in a second. Anything that kind of caught your eye when looking at all the different markets here for Mullarkey versus Turner?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't end up getting a bet on this fight, and I wanted to. Like early in the week, I thought I was going to back Turner. I didn't take the fight yet. He was like in the minus 130 range, and then by the time, literally, I think it was like maybe the next day. It might even have been the same day. I forget if it was like Monday or Tuesday. By the time I taped the fight, I'm like, oh yeah, definitely betting Jalen Turner. And then I look and he's like minus 170. So the line definitely got away from us. I do still favor Turner. I think he's the more powerful striker. Jamie Mullarkey, he's been kind to us in the past. Like he is the type of underdog that you do want to back because he's going to fight for your money. He has multiple tools where he's, somewhat durable, somewhat chinny at times, but like he seems to get stunned, I'd say, right? Like you don't think he's going to get knocked out, but he eats so many punches and he gets wobbled. So it's just like one of those things where the knockout is probably coming really soon. And he's been knocked out before, just not recently. But aside from that, like we know he has cardio to push a pace for 15 minutes. We know he's going to try to mix in the takedowns, even though he's not a very good wrestler. He at least has those tools to where when he faces frauds like Devontae Smith, who we talked about earlier, and Devontae Smith boxes him up for a round and Mullarkey keeps going forward. And then by round 2, it's like, oh, snap, Mullarkey's still coming at me and I don't have anything left in the tank. Like that's the type of underdog that he is. The problem is I don't think Jalen Turner is that type of fraud. Like I think Jalen Turner is a good prospect. I think Jalen Turner is continuously improving. Obviously the level of competition has been very low, but this is a spot where I think he's the better striker. The grappling's been improving as well. I think he's just going to be physically stronger. I think Mullarkey, if he tries to take him down, I think he's probably not going to have success in doing so. And if he does, we've seen Turner multiple times reverse his opponents and hit a sweep. So I don't have any concerns about Turner in this matchup, to be honest with you. I know there's a lot of people on the Mullarkey side thinking that he's like the best underdog to target this week, but I don't think so. I think there's better underdogs to target. I'll have some exposure to him on DraftKings just because of all those things that I mentioned. Like he's going to push a pace. I think the fight probably ends in a finish. Yeah, he could maybe mix in some wrestling. It's just that I don't think he's going to do any of those things. If he does, he's going to score well. So I'm not going to ignore him completely, but I do think Turner probably finishes him. If not, I think he probably convincingly wins the decision here.
Yeah, I was really excited for this fight because I felt like I still feel this way. Like I have a really good read on it. Like I think the length of Jalen Turner, he's extremely long for this weight class. And Jamie Mullarkey is a guy who eats a lot of punches. And yeah, he's durable. We've seen him knocked out before, but for the most part, I would describe Jamie Mullarkey as a pretty durable fighter who will fight for your money. He's able to overcome a lot of adversity. We saw that in his last fight. But I think that Turner's gonna have a lot of success kickboxing at range here. He's someone who actually utilizes his length pretty well. The one thing that I kind of, worry about in terms of the betting market is I just can't really find a line that I think has a ton of value on the money line. Like I think Turner has to be the favorite here just due to his upside in the first round. Like I think unless Mullarkey lands an early takedown, and I think Jalen Turner's flaws here, I'll get to that in a second, but unless Mullarkey lands a takedown real early in round 1, I think he loses it at a high clip. And honestly, Jalen Turner's a solid fighter, man. Like I think a lot of people are kind of overstating his flaws. Like, yeah, Matt Frevola was able to wrestle him and he slowed down a little bit in that fight. But Jalen Turner's a decent grappler. We cashed on him by submission his last time out against Uros Medic. And obviously offensive jiu-jitsu is a little bit different than takedown defense, which is likely what he'll have to lean on here. But Jalen Turner doesn't have a ton of flaws in his game. As John said, I don't really think Jalen Turner is that much of a fraud, and his cardio, does he hit a wall at 7 minutes? Sometimes, but at the same time, in the Matt Frevola fight, which is his only fight that went to the third round inside of the UFC, he was moving forward in that third round. I don't think this is a guy with huge flaws in his game. So I think if you're going to bet the Mullarkey side, which if I had to bet a side, I would probably bet Mullarkey. I think there's good ways to go about it. Decision is plus 500, round 3, or by decision is plus 350. That's a decent look. And also if you look at the decision only money line on DraftKings, Mullarkey plus 130, and there's a chance that Mullarkey finds his own finish. But I tend to think that a lot of the finishing upside, at least in the first round of the fight, is with Jalen Turner. And as the fight goes on, Mullarkey might wear on him a little bit, but I tend to think most of Mullarkey's win condition comes via decision. So maybe it'll be Turner early on, but I tend to think that, I want to pick Mullarkey here. I think pick him makes a lot of sense. I'll pick Jalen Turner just to get it over with and move on, but I think it's a really competitive fight, one I'm certainly looking forward to come Saturday night. Let's move on now to the 5-fight main card here for UFC 272 in Vegas this weekend. We got Covington and Masvidal at the top of the bill. We got 4 fights we'll discuss before then, including a 5-round fight between RDA and Renato Moicano, who takes the fight on short notice, but we kick it off as we tend to do all too often with a sloppy heavyweight fight on a pay-per-view main card. We got Sergey Spivak currently minus 195. He's 8.7K on DraftKings against Greg Hardy, who comes back plus 165. 7.5K for Greg Hardy here. John, Kelly, I will let you go first in this fight. Any hot takes here with the heavyweights? Or I know that we've kind of had a little bit of success backing Sergey Spivak in the past and really fading Greg Hardy, a guy who's not really a martial artist, in my opinion, a guy who kind of relies on that early knockout. But he struggled a little bit in terms of well-roundedness of other people's games. I think Spivak has a much more well-rounded game than Hardy. I guess my question to you is, like, do you think Hardy's going to be able to get him out of there early? Because if not, kind of expect him to drown a little bit if this fight hits the ground.
Yeah, I think this one basically comes down to how you think Greg Hardy comes out and fights. Because obviously early on in his career on the regional scene and early in the UFC, we knew he has that enormous power and he was just going to fight like it. Like he was just going to come forward and swing heavies and try to knock his opponents out early. But since then, you've really seen an evolution in his game where he's turned into more of like a technical kickboxing point fighter. And that's not a bad thing per se, but I honestly think like I kind of view him in like the Johnny Walker mode in that he probably should fight like that because that gives him his best chance to win. The guy has no cardio. Yes, he's a decent striker when he fights like that, like the reserved, smart, technical game plan. I don't think he could really do it over 15 minutes consistently. I know you could look at the Volkov fight and say, well, he did it then, but really, like, he wasn't pressured. Nobody put a pace on him there. Like, I really don't think he can win a decision at a high clip versus almost anybody. So it's like, if I only think he has 5 to 7 minutes of cardio, it's like, how does he win? He has to win by knockout, in my opinion. And against Sergey Spivak, it's certainly live, especially if it's just that I don't know if Hardy's going to come out and fight like that, especially after being knocked out in a recent fight. But it basically just comes down to if you think Hardy's going to go wild in the first round, but also if you think he can keep the fight standing. And I don't know if he does. Like, I think he does originally. Like, his first level takedown defense is pretty good, and Spivak's not necessarily a good wrestler by any means. But the thing I like about Spivak is he's at least like doing things. Like, he's not very good at anything, but he's putting out a lot of activity. His striking's not good, but he's at least moving forward. You know, he'll muscle guys up against the fence and try to trip them to the ground. And those things I don't think will work early against Greg Hardy, but it's like if Hardy outstrikes him, doesn't knock him out, or maybe tries to finish him and doesn't, and then it comes into round 2, Hardy's huffing and puffing, well, eventually those, you know, not so good takedowns are going to work against a tired Greg Hardy. And once he gets put on the mat, I think it's blouses, man. So I actually think I might target a prop on this. Like, if you were targeting Greg Hardy, you could look at the first round knockout, which I think was like plus 600 earlier in the week. I don't know if that's still available, but also FanDuel had like the KO and submission bands in round 2 and 3 were actually both at plus 600 on the Spivak side. So it's like, if you think it makes it to round 2 and Hardy's starting to fade, like, I feel like those can be a decent amount of value, whether you're targeting the knockout or the submission. I don't know which one he's going to take if it does get there, but I do think Spivak probably finishes in round 2 or round 3 if he makes it outside of the first round here.
Martian, your thoughts here on the pay-per-view opener?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's very sad that we have to be talking about a Greg Hardy fight on a pay-per-view main card. I don't know what this whole little experiment is still going on for, but I do agree with what John said. The knockout at plus 300 is the way to play him. I don't see any other way this guy can win the fight. And I really think that Spivak really needs one takedown here, because every time that he's gotten takedowns in the UFC, he's looked to submit. He has a good arm triangle. He's heavy on top, knows how to mount and throw ground and pound. He pounded Van Der out for a finish. He 10-8'd Carlos Felipe in round 3. Tough fight going into round 3, probably 1-1, and he dug deep, got the takedown, got the 10-8 round. So he does a lot of work on top, and with just how bad Greg Hardy is on bottom, I think there's a good chance that just one takedown is all Spivak needs to wilt Greg Hardy on bottom. I'm a bit confused about which finish he's going to get as well. You see the props plus 300 for sub and knockout. I don't know, man. It's a really tough question. I think that's the main question in this fight for me is Spivak going to pound him out, or is he going to get a sub? And like I said, if you like Hardy, take him by knockout. Take the extra few dollars. What is it? Plus 170 versus plus 300. I think that's definitely worth it to take Hardy by knockout.
Yeah, I guess I have a contrarian take on this fight. I think Greg Hardy's pretty live, and you guys both outlined in terms of like the actual mixed martial arts here. Like Sergey Spivak, for sure, a more talented guy in terms of MMA than Greg Hardy is, but Sergey Spivak is actually a guy. So it's funny coming into this fight, I was actually hoping that we'd get a bettable line on Spivak because he's coming off of a knockout loss to Tom Aspinall where he basically just got absolutely blown out of the water. And I know Tom Aspinall is close to a pick'em in a main event in 2 weeks, but Greg Hardy, if Greg Hardy had been coming off of like the Maurice Green fight, I think we'd have this fight close to a pick'em here, and I would have loved to back Sergey Spivak in that type of market. But at this point, minus 195. Plus 165 for Hardy on the comeback. Like we've seen Spivak twice in his UFC career just kind of get out athleted by guys. The Walt Harris fight in his debut and then the Tom Aspinall fight. Spivak might have landed a combined 1 or 2 strikes between both of those fights. Like he's a guy who I feel like doesn't deal with adversity very well. And Greg Hardy is not very good at many things in MMA, but he's an absolute freak athlete. He hits pretty hard. The phenomenon with Greg Hardy is that like he came up through Contender Series super green and would just kind of attack guys and go for the kill in the opening minute. And then, there's a whole story where like, oh, he's dorming at ATT. He wants to become a complete martial artist. Now he just like goes out there and point fights with guys and then just drowns the second he gets taken down because he can't learn, basic defensive jiu-jitsu over the course of 3 years at the UFC level. It's just really not that possible to do so. I do think that if we see kind of a vintage Greg Hardy here where he comes out and is just a better athlete than Spivak, I think a first-round knockout is possible, like plus 500. I'm definitely one of those guys. You guys know me. I'm always betting on wrestlers. I'm always betting on guys who win minutes consistently. It pains me to want to have money on Greg Hardy this weekend. I just feel like the line is too wide, and maybe instead of betting the money line, I'll get like round 1 KO plus 600, and I'll only have to lose, I should say. I'll only have to lose a half unit on this guy instead of full sending it for a unit at plus 165 or whatever he's at on the money line. So I'll pick Spivak, but I do think a Hardy knockout in round 1 is live, and it would certainly not surprise me if he just kind of goes out there and dunks on Spivak in the opening minutes of the fight.
One thing I'll add real quick, Greg Hardy and under half a round. So if Greg Hardy wins in the first 2.5 minutes is plus 1,200 on Draftkings. So if you, like you said, vintage Greg Hardy comes out, tackles him like he's on the Dallas Cowboys again, I could see him getting that plus 1,200 prop done. But if it goes past that, I think we're going to see the Moldovan monster get a finish.
Is that on DK, you said, Martian?
Yeah. Greg Hardy and under half a round.
Shout out to DK. That's like an innovative prop. They've been opening a lot of new type of markets for MMA. So shout out to them. I certainly like that. Maybe I'll sprinkle like a quarter unit on that. That seems good to me. Let's move on to the next fight here. This is one between two pretty entertaining characters. Kevin Holland is ballooned up to a minus 350 betting favorite, $9.1 thousand against Alex Cowboy Oliveira, who comes back 270. He's 7.1K on DraftKings. And if you had told me after the Kevin Holland back-to-back losses to Vettori and Brunson that he would be minus 350 again relatively soon, I probably wouldn't have believed you. Add that onto the fact that Kyle Dawkins was going to beat his ass and then Kevin Holland got bailed out by an accidental foul there last time out. I would be really shocked that he's minus 350, except now that he's at 170 pounds. I look at the matchup. For whatever reason, I just have no interest in betting Cowboy Oliveira at plus 270. This is a guy who we know he's a big family. We know he's fighting to feed like 7 kids at this point. To me, he's only 34 years old, but to me, it just looks like he's going out there to get a paycheck at this point in time. Like I have not seen anything from Alex Cowboy since like really the Peter Sabata fight that was encouraging in terms of his long-term trajectory. I mean, he looked okay in minutes of the Nico Price fight, but like the Shavkat fight, he looked okay for a second, then just insta-tapped. The Randy Brown fight, it was like a one-arm rear naked choke. Like I just have nothing with Alex Cowboy Oliveira that inspires any type of confidence. Can I lay minus 350 on Kevin Holland? Hell no. But what I can bet is Kevin Holland by sub plus 850. I think Cowboy Oliveira, I had this written down somewhere, but I think like out of his 7 or 8 UFC losses, 5 of them are by submission. It's a little tough because I don't expect Kevin Holland to shoot takedowns necessarily, but like if they get in a scramble, Alex Oliveira decides he doesn't want to be there anymore. Like Kevin Holland's a pretty shitty wrestler, and maybe he's improving it, maybe he's not. You can look at his OnlyFans to see the videos of him fighting random people coming into his gym about his takedown defense. But Kevin Holland is like legitimately decent jiu-jitsu, especially if he's going to be on the offensive here. So I think Holland sub plus 850 is not a play I would normally make for a guy who's unlikely to shoot takedowns, but Cowboy Oliveira, man, is just like inspiring no confidence in me. And I think he's pretty liable to quit. And there's no easier way to quit in MMA and take less damage than just to give your back when you get to the ground. So I'll play Holland by sub. I think he's a strong play on DK. Maybe not the best, maybe not as good as like the Umar Nurmagomedovs, Colby Covingtons of the 9K price. 9K price plus range on DK. But yeah, I like Kevin Holland to win the fight. Martian, we'll kick it to you first here. I have a sneaky suspicion you're on the sub. We may or may not have texted about it earlier this week. Any other thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, I mean, Holland sub is an easy bet, plus 850 there. I'm in. Oliveira, great points about him fighting for a paycheck, 7 kids, 5 baby mamas, and, just a crazy guy living down there on the ranch in Brazil. Only really has like 10 minutes of cardio, and that's kind of been a problem throughout like his entire career, and it's just extremely evident late into his career now. He just can't put together a good 15 minutes. I mean, Peter Sabata was literally one of the only times in his entire career where he's done a good 15 minutes. And you brought up a lot of good points about, just the sub being there, and it might not necessarily have a conventional path, but the guy's been clubbed and subbed like 5 times. Gunnar Nelson, Cowboy, Cerrone, the 2 guys you mentioned, Shavkat and Randy Brown, all club and subs. So, that's all the thoughts I have on the bets here, except for the fact that Holland 350 in his welterweight debut, I think it's just insane. I mean, this is like approaching the same price as like Charlie Ontiveros a few last year or something like that. So I think that people, Holland is just notoriously overrated. Like you said, we got robbed of Kyle Dawkins and the sub prop and whatnot. If just to let you guys know, if Holland was the one who absorbed that headbutt and choked him out, the UFC would have been raising his hand that night. But they said, "Oh, Holland lost. Let's have a little conversation with the ref here and change this result." So our boy Dacus got robbed, and hopefully we can make some money back this weekend. So, Holland sub hopefully, but honestly, Cowboy winning would just be, hilarious. And this matchup is just fantastic. So I'm excited for this one Saturday.
Yeah, John Kelly, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I played the submission prop as well. So hopefully this one's going to cash it for the whole boys. Played it for half a unit. I think I said cash it for the whole boys. I meant to say the whole team for the boys. So let me correct that real quick. I played it for half a unit on FanDuel. I don't really have a ton to add here. The only thing I will kind of disagree with you on, Jonah, is that I really don't think Holland's that good of a DK play at all, to be honest. Like outside of a round 1 finish specifically, like I don't even know if he meets value. Like historically, he's not really a high volume guy. We know he's not going to land takedowns, like you said. And yeah, maybe he's been improving the wrestling. Maybe he surprised us, lands a takedown. He did have one. Who was it, against Derek Brunson, I think, where he was bragging about the one takedown. But yeah, it's not a spot where I think he has a ton of upside. He has to have that first round finished, and hopefully it's a submission, and then we get there both ways. But yeah, I'd really look to get underweight on Kevin Holland and this fight in general. I'm not interested in the underdog. Like I've been saying it all night. There's so many underdogs that I like this week. Alex Oliveira is not even remotely close to that conversation. So it's an easy pass for me on DraftKings. Hopefully Holland gets the submission and we cash it for the boys.
And speaking of DK, 2 things. First of all, I'm not necessarily super high on Kevin Holland. Like, I don't necessarily want to get overweight. I'll put it this way. I think he's a better play than Tagir Ulanbekov and both Marina Rodriguez in the over 9K range. I would certainly play, Umar over him, Colby over him, but I'll probably match the field on Kevin Holland. Like, I think he makes sense as a DK play. I think he's better than some of the options in that range, but certainly not the best of the best. And then speaking of underdogs, forgot to mention, if you didn't get it from my breakdown, like Greg Hardy, really good underdog in DK this weekend. Like if he wins, which I think happens 40-ish% of the time, he probably projects for close to 100 points. Like it's going to be round 1, probably gets a knockdown, not too many strikes or control time or anything like that. But I think Greg Hardy is up there with Tim Elliott as one of the best underdog plays on the slate in terms of the DraftKings pricing. 3 fights left. Let's move on to one of the fights that I think has been kind of the most hotly debated throughout the week. We've had a lot of agreement on the show. All of us just sent the same plus 850 prop. All of us are betting Tim Elliott at plus 220, but I got a sneaky suspicion we'll have some what's the word? Some contrasting opinions here in Bryce Mitchell versus Edson Barboza in our featured bout on the pay-per-view. We got Bryce Mitchell minus 170. He's 8.3K. Hasn't fought in a hot minute after beating Andre Fili in what, in my opinion, was by far the most impressive performance of his career. And we got Edson Barboza coming off of a disappointing loss in the main event to Giga Chikadze. He's plus 150 here. He's 7.9K. John Kelly, I know you are looking to make a bet on this fight. I'm not sure if you pulled the trigger yet. Break down the fight for us and then tell us kind of what you're looking for in the betting market in order to make a bet.
Yeah, I did end up pulling the trigger this morning, actually. I got involved on Edson at plus 140. for a unit, and this is a spot where Bryce is just going to have to prove it to me. And I do like Bryce Mitchell. He's obviously got a ton of skills. The grappling is a problem for most people, but I mean, you look at the level of competition. The Andre Fili win was impressive, but at the same time, like doing that against Andre Fili and then doing it against Edson Barboza, I think is two different things. And Bryce Mitchell, he's run through all these guys on the mat, but it's like he's just going to have to prove it to me. I think Edson is clearly the better striker. I think he could instantly hurt Bryce's legs. Like if he lands a couple leg kicks and then Bryce's leg is compromised, like that's going to be an issue for him. I think if Bryce doesn't get the takedowns immediately and repeatedly, if he doesn't stay there, then he's going to be in big trouble here. So it's just a spot where I'm willing to take a shot on the underdog who's more proven. He's fought the best of the best. He's going to punish Bryce as he's coming in on those entries, just like he did against Makwan Amirkhani. And I just think it's a spot where Bryce is just really going to have to prove it to me. And maybe he does. Obviously, if he wins, he's going to look like a huge favorite, and I'll look pretty stupid. But, you know, maybe I just have a sick obsession with losing tickets on our guy Edson Barboza. But I'm going to do it one more time here. It's just, it makes too much sense to me. So I'm really not going to overthink it. I think Bryce is just going to have to prove it.
Yeah, I'll go second here, and I actually bet Bryce Mitchell. So not only are we disagreeing on the pick on the fight and our kind of our viewpoint on the fight, but actually contrasting bets here, which is something that doesn't really happen often on the show. And I don't think your breakdown is necessarily wrong, John. Like it's a pretty conventional, striker versus grappler matchup. But I guess where I kind of disagree with you here is I think one takedown for Bryce Mitchell, first of all, has a chance to finish the fight, obviously, because we know he's super strong on top with his kind of unorthodox jiu-jitsu where he kind of gets to weird positions but has a lot of success. We've seen him in that twister position before. He really likes getting to full mount, which is a little bit underutilized these days. We see a lot of guys who like to hang out in like side control or half guard as opposed to mount. Bryce Mitchell a little bit different in that regard, but honestly, where we disagree, John, is I think Edson Barboza, like he's not getting up when Bryce Mitchell takes him down. Like Edson Barboza's get up game is the biggest red flag to me here. And, Edson's been around a long time. You made great points about how he's fought. He's seen this type of matchup before. He's fought the who's who at 145, 155 pounds for whatever the last 10 years is. His takedown defense is held up, but it's his get-ups that he really struggles with. Like the Makwan fight, he was stuck on his back. He was lucky, I thought, that some of those fights against Makwan came towards the end of the round, and Amirkhani wasn't able to kind of hold him down. I just don't think that Edson makes real efforts to get back up. He'll close his guard without really throwing up submissions. He'll be right against the cage and not kind of butt scoot back to the cage to try to post and get up back to his feet. And, Edson is like very dangerous on the feet. And I acknowledge that as a Bryce Mitchell backer in this spot. But, I'm not going to say that Bryce Mitchell is like the brightest guy out there in the world. You guys can decide that for yourself. But one thing I will say is this kid has a pretty high fight IQ. Like in the Andre Fili fight, faced a little bit of adversity, at least the most he's fought or seen, I should say, in the UFC in round 2, composed himself, was able to land takedowns. And I honestly think his wrestling has improved, and we haven't seen him in a while. He's 27 years old. I expect him to make more improvements in his wrestling. It's been about 18 months since we last saw him against Fili. And when he came into the UFC, his offensive jiu-jitsu was good. He was fun. He got to weird, interesting positions, but like he was timing, power doubles against Andre Fili. And I think that against Edson Barboza, especially a guy who's so kick heavy, I think that Bryce is going to have a lot of opportunities to show off his improved wrestling. So I'm expecting not only improvements from Bryce Mitchell in terms of the wrestling, but I'm not, looking to see Edson Barboza have a lot of good get-ups here. And we know Bryce Mitchell, thug nasty on the ground. He's got that nickname for a reason. The guy is super lethal in top position. So I'll pick Bryce Mitchell. I think he makes for a fantastic play on DraftKings. I'm sure to be overweight compared to the field on him. And I laid it at minus 150 for a unit. I will say I think the price is getting closer to accurate, right? He's about minus 170 now. Not sure I'd bet that on the money line, but I kind of just expect Bryce Mitchell to go out there and dominate, implement a game plan and get it done this weekend. So it's 1-1. John and I disagreed. Martian, you can be the tiebreaker here. What are your thoughts on Mitchell versus Barboza?
Well, the tiebreaker is going to be going to Jonah and to Bryce Mitchell. I will be siding with him as well. Still haven't forgave Barboza for boofing that fight against Giga. Just terrible memories. I'm going to move on before I upset myself too much, honestly. But I think whoever wins this fight is just going to look like a massive hindsight favorite. We often, after the fights, and we're going to, what was the actual line there? I think we're going to say whoever won this fight is going to be, they were minus 900. Whether it's Barboza chops him down with the leg kicks right away and Mitchell is kind of screwed at range, like John was saying, or maybe we get an early takedown and just a 10-8 round on top and just dominance from Mitchell in top position. And, good points brought up by Jonah with his get up game with Barboza. I think that's the biggest reason why, I can't have much faith in him is because once the guy gets taken down, he is very, liable to stay on his back. Dan Ige had some top time, like you were saying. Makwan got him down a few times. And, with Mitchell, I think the guy is, a pretty smart fighter. Definitely not a smart, human being. Keep this guy away from the power tools and everything. But, and I think he does fight with like an interesting style. He doesn't think he's a striker. He knows his capabilities are pretty limited. So he circles around. The big cage is going to favor him in this fight. He's going to have a lot of move around. He's not going to want to stay at range with Barboza at all. And he swings that big overhand, that big punch, and then he dives right into a takedown. So he's not going to be fooling around with Edson at range at all. And I think he's going to get, one big, overhand, duck into a takedown, and he's going to just be passing through Edson, like a hot knife through butter. And he's going to be winning these rounds decisively on top. And I think there's a good chance we see a 30-27 from Mitchell, possibly even a sub as well, just because I think we could see, 12, 13 minutes of top time here. So I'll be going with Mitchell as well. Not really seeing a bet that catches my eye, but money line wise, I think Mitchell has the more upside. And Barboza, if you like him, I'd definitely have some KO bets along with the money line if you like him.
We'll give you a chance for rebuttal, or should we just let these guys settle in the cage on Saturday night?
Yeah, we'll just let them settle. I just the biggest thing that I'm hearing, just from not from you guys, but just in general, like I think the general consensus is like everyone expects Bryce to just auto land takedowns here, and I don't. I maybe he does, maybe I'm wrong, but he's gonna have to prove it to me. We'll see.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the co-main event here, where we lost one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best underdog betting spots of the year. I know it's the third month of the year, but I was really excited to send RDA into the cage on Saturday night in a co-main against Rafael Fiziev at like plus 220. Fiziev pulls out due to COVID. We got Renato Moicano flying in from Brazil to make 160-pound catch weight, hopefully to make 160 pounds tomorrow morning on Friday. But this is our co-main here. It's at 160 catch weight, as I mentioned. RDA favorite makes a lot of sense, minus 187.3K. But Moicano, who is coming off a really strong performance against Alex Hernandez, where he essentially knocked the guy out and then choked him out soon thereafter. Moicano plus 155, 7.2K. And honestly, my opinion on this fight is I think the line would be a lot closer if it wasn't this kind of circumstance for Moicano. This is a guy who, Moicano isn't necessarily huge. He's fought at 145 pounds. So I can't imagine he walks around like way bigger than 160. Obviously, he's going to have to cut to make a catch weight tomorrow. Certainly not ideal. I think he flew by himself from Brazil, is training with Edson Barboza's team a little bit at like the Fighter Hotel and whatnot this weekend. So certainly not a good spot for Renato Moicano. And I was really excited to bet RDA against Fiziev, but as you guys all know, like we bet numbers, we don't bet fighters, and we bet numbers and matchups. And this is a matchup where I think I favor RDA, right? He's a guy who's kind of been able to grind out a lot of opponents, even towards the back end of his career. Most of his struggles have come against really strong wrestling, 170 pounders. Renato Moicano is a decent wrestler, a really good grappler, but also closer to a natural 145er, and then he is a 170er. And look, I favor RDA, but I gotta say, like rewatching the Paul Felder fight, I mean, it's a joke that fight was a split decision, but I don't necessarily think RDA striking is what it used to be. And I think he would have won the fight against Fiziev, kind of going to his takedowns early and often. And that's a possibility here. I think he'll have a cardio advantage, especially considering that Moicano doesn't really have a camp for this fight and is taking it on short notice. So I'll pick RDA here. But I think the real interesting thing to talk about, and of course, we'll talk about the betting markets. John Kelly, I'm going to let you go next. This is an interesting situation on DraftKings because we've seen situations with Kevin Holland before where he's been an underdog in a fight at like 8K, and then he's a minus 1,000 favorite. It's just easy lock button on DraftKings. In this spot, Dos Anjos is only 7.3K because he was supposed to be an underdog to Fiziev. Now he finds himself a minus 180 favorite in a 5-round fight. He's a guy who's historically been a pretty decent DraftKings scorer. It's a big slate, so I don't think you necessarily need to lock button RDA, but I guess my question to you, John, is like, how do you approach RDA on DraftKings? Like, this is a fight where, first of all, I would be stacking it if I played cash games. And I actually think I'm going to play MMA cash for the first time in a long time this weekend, just because I think a lot of people will make the mistake of not stacking these two fighters together. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's $14,500 combined on DK. Quickly to get into the championship rounds. Both guys are cheap. You lock in a win. So in a cash format, I think I'm going to lock both guys in. My question to you, John, is like in a GPP format, just how much RDA are you playing? Because I think he might be the most highly owned fighter on the entire slate, or maybe second to Colby Covington, but he's going to be up there is my point. How are you approaching RDA on DK?
Yeah, I would think he's going to be first or second highest owned, probably the first, but who knows? Because Moicano is going to be super popular too. I mean, you can't get around it. You have to get a lot of exposure to this fight. I'm going to have exposure to both sides because I really don't. I feel like I don't have a strong read on it. But I would say I'm going to have a lot of RDA. I'm definitely going to have some Moicano as well, but I just favor like the potential to go 5 rounds. Moicano's coming in on just 4 days notice. Like, I think that's an issue. Not that Moicano has like bad cardio, but it's like he's only been scheduled for a 5 rounder, I think, twice, and both of those ended inside the first 3 rounds. So it's like we've never seen him over 25 minutes in general, and now we have to assume that he can go 25 minutes with RDA, who's one of the better fighters he's ever faced, and then do it on 4 days notice. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I buy that. And then on the flip side, like, why I'm not super confident in RDA is because you have a guy who, yes, he's fought the best of the best. He's a legend of the sport, but he turns 38 later this year. He's coming off a sizable layoff. And honestly, even the Paul Felder fight, like, there were moments where I didn't think he looked that good, or at least, didn't look as good as he previously has. And now coming off the sizable layoff, it's just like new opponent as well. Like, I have a lot of questions kind of on both sides. I lean towards RDA just because he's the one with the full camp, better cardio over 25 minutes. So I don't know. I lean RDA. I'm going to have a lot of him on DraftKings because of the pricing, but I'm not going to ignore Moicano. I think Moicano has upside as well. It's just that I don't know like what a Moicano win would look like here, because it's not like other fights where Moicano just takes people down and out grapples them. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to do that to RDA here. RDA's never been subbed in his career. He's faced grapplers better than Moicano. So I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like I don't have a good read on it. I think it's going to be a great fight, and I think I'm going to have exposure to both sides. Maybe I'm taking the easy way out, but across multiple lineups, I'm definitely gonna hedge this one with a decent lean towards the what I'm assuming is going to be the more popular fighter in RDA.
Yeah, it's interesting you kind of mentioned like what does a Moicano win look like. It's important to note like this guy has 0 career knockouts, like including on the regional scene. And like you mentioned, RDA has been a tough guy to kind of get out of there. Martian, before I kick it to you, something that John mentioned is like he used the word confidence a lot of times in his breakdown. Like it's hard, at least in my opinion, to feel confident about a side here. I just don't really know what the fight is going to look like. This is like 2 well-rounded guys who prefer to grapple, but that might be, turn into a stalemate, and then it turns into like a cardio battle. I guess my question to you, Martian, is like, how do you see this fight playing out, kind of independent of the betting line, and then obviously your take in terms of, where the line sits now with RDA like minus 180?
Yeah, I do agree that it's a hard fight to be confident in, but if you're confident in one guy, I think it's much, much easier to be confident in RDA. All of the things around Moicano with him fighting 3 weeks ago and, winning the fight, not exactly a completely one-way fight, but it was a pretty clean performance from him. We saw this with Bobby Green last week, and he said, his hands were still hurting from the punches he landed. Obviously, he landed like hundreds more punches than Moicano did, but your body peaks out at a certain time, and then you fight. You train for 6 to 8 weeks. You keep preparing for that one fight day, and then after you have that fight day, your body's gonna have to rest, recuperate. You're gonna be eating a lot more food, not watching your weight, not celebrating a little bit, drinking alcohol, and then I know he said he wanted to get back in the cage soon. I know he was calling for more fights, but I doubt that he completely was in fight mode from the second that fight ended. So now he was down in Brazil. He had to, get back on a plane and get back up to Vegas. I thought it wouldn't be a big deal that he was flying from Florida to Vegas, but when you add it's from Brazil to Vegas, I think it is something to really to consider here, and that's why it's hard to be confident in Moicano. And then if you look at his past 4 wins, he did hit takedowns in all 4 of those fights. 2 of those were kind of club and subs with Swanson and Hernandez, but he has kind of relied on his grappling to win a lot of his fights, and I don't think he's going to be having, or I definitely don't think he has a grappling advantage over RDA. I think RDA is the better wrestler, probably the better jiu-jitsu grappler as well. So Moicano is not going to have that typical grappling edge that he normally does, and I think that's what's going to make him this such an uphill battle for him. Also, you have to think about the Hernandez fight that we just saw. I was rewatching that, and every time Hernandez went in the southpaw stance, he would blast a body kick, and it landed on Moicano. And 2 out of 3 judges actually thought that Hernandez won that round just because he came on strong at the end of the round and put up some volume, showed aggression. So I don't think Moicano is necessarily a great round winner. His cardio is not proven. We haven't seen him at 155 late in the fight. And, I think people are being too harsh on RDA come with the layoff. Obviously it's been 15, 16 months, but he had a 4-year hiatus from lightweight. Was at 170. He had to cut that weight back down to 155. It was a 5-round fight. And I know it was short notice for Felder. I know it was somehow a split decision, but I still think you got to take away a lot more positives from RDA in that fight than negatives. He went the full 5 rounds. He dominated the fight. He relied on his grappling, hit a lot of takedowns. I thought it was a really good performance from him getting back down at 155. So considering we have seen RDA in way more 5-round fights, he was training for this fight for much longer. He was training for fights that got canceled multiple times over the past year. So I think the guy is going to be in plenty good shape. I haven't seen him decline enough to think that it's going to be a big problem. And I think if this fight goes into the later rounds, if it hits the scorecards, it's really going to favor Rafael dos Anjos. So that's why I'll be signing with him. And, money line side, I think that RDA is the way to go. I mean, I like Moicano a lot. I'm excited for this matchup. Wouldn't be mad at all to see him pull off the upset, but I just don't see enough value with the short notice with the matchup that doesn't favor him. So I think it's a RDA or pass here.
I had to make a bet on the fight. I think the place I would look is the decision only market on DK RDA minus 175. I think he should be a bigger favorite if we're only factoring the decision.
Certainly.
Martian, your breakdown kind of mentioned that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Like it
all
shouldn't be
right. Maybe
anything
I'll
under
log in
minus
and bet it.
300.
Oh, yeah, maybe I'll bet it now. We got all right. All right, well, I'm logging in, so we'll keep it low key until then, despite the fact that 30 people are
The
watching it
chat,
live.
the chat already steamed it.
We got a bunch of snipers. I mean, the good news is we've got like a 20-second delay because John was talking before, anyone heard that he wasn't talking. So the good news is I've got about 20 seconds to get in as I talk. But in all seriousness, we've been going for about an hour and a half. We'll move on to the main event now. Appreciate everyone tuning in live, and of course, everyone watching the replay. If you're watching live, we would appreciate if you would like the video, smash that like button. Let's talk about the main event, boys. We got Colby Covington minus 335, 9.4K on DraftKings against Jorge Masvidal plus 260, 6.8K. I will save you the talk about the narrative. Anybody with a pulse, anybody watching our show knows the story between these two guys. Friends turn enemies, yada, yada, yada. One of the worst press conferences I've ever seen in UFC history. Let's talk about the fight, my friends. Martian, I will let you kick it off as our guest. Give me your thoughts here. Colby Covington, big favorite. I think everyone expected him to be a big favorite, but seeing some love for Jorge Masvidal. Line hasn't really budged much throughout fight week. I'm curious your thoughts on how the fight plays out Saturday night.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I'll say that I'm pretty confident in this fight. Going the distance. I got some good negative CLV on that. I bet it earlier in the week, going the distance at minus 142. It's down to minus 122. I mean, that means this fight finishes over 50% of the time. I really don't see that. I don't understand how people think it finishes that highly. Colby Covington, not really a finisher at all. Masvidal, the much more finishing upside, but then he's the big underdog at plus 275. So I think this line is wide in terms of the money line as well. You know, to put it quite frankly, as Jorge said in the press conference, that Colby's going to try to sniff his dick for 25 minutes, and it might be a little to the point there, but I kind of gotta agree. Covington, he's obviously a relentless wrestler, great cardio, great pressure, but the guy just doesn't do a whole lot of damage, and that's what I've been saying in my breakdowns, all week with this guy. And he gets the takedowns, he doesn't land a whole lot of strikes, he doesn't have much power on the feet. So I think at range we're going to see Masvidal landing the much harder strikes. When the fight goes into the clinch, we're going to see Masvidal briefly taken down, but I don't think Colby's going to keep him down. I think that Masvidal is going to bounce back up to his feet, land some knees to the body, land some elbows, circle off the cage. And if he can do that multiple times enough, I think that Colby's going to have a lot of trouble getting these takedowns over and over. I think people are really underrating Masvidal's his body work, his knees to the body, his kicks to the body at range. And I think that Masvidal has got a really good chance to win this fight. The DraftKings decision only line is minus 1100 for Colby Covington. I think that is way too wide in favor of Colby. I think that Masvidal winning rounds here and winning a decision really completely isn't out of the question. I think that People are just overrating Colby Covington here. I know the guy is relentless with his wrestling, but I could see with the right judges. It's hard to rely on judges because they've been pretty bad lately. But I think the damage is going to be in favor of Jorge Masvidal in this fight, and I think we're going to see a 5-round decision. Gun to my head pick, gun to my head prediction. I will say, Colby 48-47, but I don't know. I think the distance here should be closer to like minus 200, honestly. So that's my most confident pick in this one, going the distance. And I've got some faith in Jorge as well. So hopefully we see a fun fight.
Yeah, I'll go second here, and then John will kick it to you to kind of give your take on the main event, and then close out the show lastly here. But I'm in a similar boat as you, Martian, in some regards. I actually played our bet is similar. I played over 4.5 rounds at minus 125. I played it last week, got a little bit ahead of a line movement. It's like minus 155 now, or I think maybe as low as minus 142 on FanDuel. I think you could still bet that, or minus 122 to go the distance, kind of more similar to Martian's bet. But regardless, we're on a similar boat there. I think I have more confidence in Colby Covington winning this fight than it sounds like Martian does. I just think that Colby's pace is so relentless, and Jorge kind of struggles with that a little bit. I will say, a lot of people are making this seem, and I'm not really a fan of Jorge Masvidal. I don't necessarily think he's ever as good as the market has made him out to be, or really the hype train of fans has made him out to be. But I will say, I feel like a lot of people are thinking of him as like this one-dimensional striker in this fight. And of course, he's only going to win the fight in the striking. Like Colby's not going to win wrestling position, or Jorge, I should say, is not going to win wrestling positions that then lead him to win rounds. But I do think he has the chance to win some positions in terms of getting up to his feet. I will say the biggest flaw, in my opinion, of Colby's game is he's not a great control grappler when he gets on top. So I do kind of expect, Masvidal has decent get-ups. He got up against Usman, who I think is a much stronger control grappler, but honestly, I think that Colby's going to be able to bully him in the clinch a little bit. I know that a lot of people think Masvidal will have some success in those positions. I kind of just think Colby's going to wear on him. His pace is just so relentless. And honestly, I think Colby's probably going to outstrike him. That might be my hottest take of the week. A lot of people seem to think that if they stay at boxing range, Jorge is going to win. And if they were going to kickbox for 25 minutes under kickboxing rules, I would of course pick Masvidal to win. I think he's a more talented striker. But in terms of MMA scoring, I think Colby's going to be the one moving forward. I think he throws more volume, has a very diverse kind of selection with his kicks that's kind of improved over at MMA Masters. His striking is getting better. I kind of just think Colby's better everywhere. Minus 300 seems about fair to me. I have no real interest in playing the money line on either side, but I like the over 4.5 rounds. I feel like the one market that's really off in this fight, I agree with the money line, is Colby inside the distance. It's like, plus 300? I mean, I guess his last win was by finish over Tyron Woodley, but that was an injury, and I know Masvidal is coming off of what could be potentially was a highlight reel knockout, could potentially be like a life or career-changing, I should say, knockout, but I don't know. Masvidal's been so difficult to finish over the course of his career. I just kind of think that it's one of those situations where Colby pushes him against the cage, bullies him. Jorge slows down, has maybe some moments early in the fight, but kind of pleats towards the end of it. And I'll pick Colby Covington in the main event. And John, we'll let you go first and give your take, obviously, on the main event, and then obviously take us out of here.
Yeah, I don't have to beat a dead horse. I like Colby as well. I think most people expect Covington to win here. I would lean with the over with you guys. I think goes to decision or over 4.5, however you want to play it. I would be surprised to see a finish on either side, to be honest with you. I think Masvidal really needs a knockout to win here. I don't see Masvidal winning minutes. I think Colby is going to be the one doing more, landing more, that forward pressure, mixing in the takedowns, banking the control time. I just don't see how Masvidal can win minutes long enough to not just do it for a round, but to do it for 15 minutes and win 3 out of 5 rounds. I don't think he can against Colby Covington. So I think he's drawing dead to a knockout. I don't think Colby is much of a finisher. I think we can all agree on that. And it's just a spot where I think it's going to be mainly how Colby fights most of his fights. Is he's going to pressure him against the fence. He's going to land a bunch of strikes, mix in the takedowns, and bank the control time. But he's not really Masvidal, I believe, has never been submitted. He's got good grappling defensively. I don't think he's going to finish him on the mat. So I guess we're really just fading a Masvidal knockout in order to get to that over. And then when it comes to DraftKings, Colby's always going to be one of the best plays on the slate just because of that high pace nature, the volume in the striking, but also mixing in the wrestling as well, just makes him one of the highest floors, highest ceiling type of plays, and then you have the potential for it to go 25 minutes and just rack up more and more points. So I'm sure he's going to be a core play for a lot of people. I'm expecting him to be right up there with RDA as some of the most expensive fighters on the card. But yeah, I'm going Colby. No bet for me as of now. I do have a parlay. He's closing out a parlay from last week with Sarukian, but that's it. So yeah, I'm going with Colby Chaos Covington. I consider him the second best welterweight in the world. For now, I'll put him in that spot ahead of my guy Hamzat Chimaev. But yeah, I don't think Jorge is even, like, I'm with Jonah. Masvidal's made such a great name off of like the Ben Askren knockout and the 3-piece Minnesota, and he's done great capitalizing in those things. The BMF win over Nate Diaz, but it's like, do you really think you could put him in the top 3 category of the division? Like, he's not in the same tier as Colby, and so I think it's Covington. I think it's pretty straightforward, and yeah, I think he gets it done this weekend.
One last thing I'll add to this. The only reason why I think that Masvidal has a better chance is because, Colby's game is to, pump out that double jab, pump out that left kick, and just throw that kind of spam volume at range. And that works against Tyron Woodley. It works against Robbie Lawler. It worked against a smaller RDA at 155, or at 170. But I just think that Masvidal is going to have a lot better tools to stop that kind of that bullshit volume that Colby just pumps out there. And Jorge is not going to concede back as easily as Tyron and Robbie Lawler did. So that's why I think it's going to get more interesting. And I, obviously maybe I just hate Colby Covington and want to believe that he's going to lose. But who knows here, but it's been a lot of fun analyzing the fights with you gentlemen. I thank you all for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Obviously, we had a little bit of technical difficulties in the beginning, but we got it squared away. But that's it, guys. We broke down all, what is it, 14 fights, a bunch of betting spots this week. Underdogs are going to be barking, hopefully, for the boys, and fun Draftkings slate as well. I'm sure we'll be chirping with a lot of you guys in Discord. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it goes a long way to show your support for the show. We definitely appreciate it, guys. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonas Shiffman and John Martian at UFO_UFC.
Nailed it.
And this is the Undisputed